Growing up, I couldn't have asked for a better life. I had great friends, a family that loved each other, and I was just genuinely happy. The winter of 2015, I'm about 13 years old, is really when I can first remember a shift in my life. It started with stomach pains that progressively got worse over the months. Then came the migraines and extreme fatigue. Some days I could barely even get out of bed. I was getting sicker and sicker, and nobody could tell us why. I was written off as an attention seeker and was told I had to have been faking it. There wasn't anything wrong with me. What seemed to happen almost overnight was an onslaught of obsessive thoughts, extreme anxiety, depression, and suicidal thoughts. It all happened seemingly out of nowhere. By the spring, I'd stopped going to school entirely. My mind was constantly plagued with thoughts of wanting to die. I had no motivation to do anything on top of physical symptoms that were only getting worse with time. By the time summer had arrived, I'd been diagnosed with anxiety and major depressive disorder. With nothing improving, I also started to have atypical panic attacks that we would find out a few years later were actually seizures. A new school year started, 8th grade. I was barely able to get out of the car, let alone attend any classes. Eventually, I found a compromise with my school. As long as I was getting my work turned in, they didn't really care where I was or what I was doing. The only place I ever felt safe at this school was the special ed class I volunteered in. Over the years, I'd grown extremely close with the student and the staff, and the relationships I formed there are some of the greatest memories I have to this day. And that class just saved my life. And this year, I was progressively getting worse, physically and mentally. I developed a pretty severe eating disorder, and my depression was rapidly getting worse. Things I previously enjoyed, I felt nothing towards anymore. While all this is happening, nobody has any idea. I'd learned to put on a persona and fake my recovery and happiness to everyone around me. I seemed completely normal. I was quickly dropping weight and losing my strength. I remember every day when everyone went to lunch, I would sit in the classroom to skip my meal. One day, one of the teachers had stayed behind and sat with me. He said he could notice something was wrong. I wasn't the same anymore. He was one of the first people to ever notice, and I broke, and I told him everything. I told him how sad I was constantly, how I was skipping meals, and how I just didn't want to be here anymore. It didn't seem worth it. I didn't realize until years later how this one conversation saved my life. How telling this one person lifted such an immense weight off my shoulders and helped me see different options and saved my life. The summer going into freshman year came, and I was at the lowest point I'd ever been. And I started to attend DBT therapy. But I wasn't committed to getting better at this time. DBT is an intense treatment to teach you coping skills to deal with anxiety and suicidal thoughts. It felt good to be surrounded by people going through the same thing. I'd never experienced being around others with a similar experience. I had always thought I was alone. I did this program for about 6 months, but those 6 months were a whirlwind of hospitalizations and doctor's appointments and everything in between. The ER became the only place I felt safe. It felt like it was the only place in the world I could go to get away from my obsessive suicidal thoughts. I probably spent 15, 20 nights in the ER, resulting in 7 admissions. An admission meant that they determined I wasn't safe to go home and should be staying in an overnight care with 24/7 monitoring by medical professionals. Around this time, I also started to attend a new alternative high school. I was only going a few times a week, and it was just a better fit for me. I was able to do more intense treatment and be in a school environment that just worked better for me. In the spring of freshman year, I started to have seizures. What started as drop seizures quickly progressed into full-body grand mal seizures. I had an array of tests to see what might be causing them. It was an epilepsy, so my medical team determined it must be a manifestation of anxiety. I was never happy with this diagnosis, nor were my parents. They could see something was physically wrong with me. I wasn't just anxious, I was sick. And nobody believed us. I can't even count how many doctors I saw just to be completely written off and told it was all in my head. Eventually, we just gave up and accepted it must have been anxiety. I was still trying to go to school, but I was having 3 to 4 seizures a day during the beginning of my sophomore year. Eventually, the school said it was too much of a disruption and I had to leave. I remember this overwhelming feeling of being unwanted and feeling like a burden to everybody around me. This caused a lot of trauma I still deal with to this day. I didn't attend another high school for 2 years in fear that they would just kick me out again. Without the anchor of school, things started to get worse and worse. The next few months basically consisted of just trying to stay alive each day. I was now 15 and have begun to feel like I hit rock bottom. One day, it just became all too much. I felt a giant pit of emptiness and pain and sadness that felt like it was never going to end. And I attempted to take my own life. This was my rock bottom. I was in and out of the hospital for the next few months, but I don't really remember much from this time. My mom says I was pretty much a zombie. When I wasn't in the hospital, my parents and friends were watching me 24/7 to make sure I wouldn't hurt myself. My best friend used to drive 40+ miles in the middle of the night if she knew I just needed someone to talk to. My mom slept on a mattress on my floor, blocking my door so I couldn't leave in the middle of the night. My boyfriend would come over every single day and sit with me as I slept, because he knew it was the only time I would sleep, because I was too afraid to be alone with my own thoughts. This was a time in my life where every single waking moment was consumed with thoughts of suicide. Then I found out my family was moving to Boston. I'd lived in Seattle pretty much my entire life up until this point, but both my parents were from Boston, all our family was here, and Boston just felt like my safe place, where I could go to escape. So I was really excited for this move. It was a new start for me. No one had any preconceived notions of me, and I wasn't the sick girl for the first time in my life. Around this time, for the first time, I really started to see what my illness was doing to my family and the people I loved around me. I saw how much it was affecting them and hurting them, and it made me hate myself. This was the first time I truly committed to treatment, not just for my family and friends, but for me, because I didn't deserve to feel like this the rest of my life, and I didn't want to. Within the first few months of moving to Boston, I'd started a new intensive DBT program. I was going 5 times a week, 4 to 6 hours a day, and it was really hard work. I had to retrain my brain to think and problem solve in a completely new way. I had to teach myself that I was more than just my illness. And after 6 really long, hard months, I was at a place in my life I never thought I would be. I wasn't having suicidal thoughts. I started to enjoy things I hadn't felt any joy in a really long time. My life had seemingly gone back to normal. In January of 2019, I had just turned 16. I got really sick. Every symptom I'd experienced had come back only 10 times worse. I was barely able to walk, and a wave of brain fog, nausea, and pain had taken over my life. Over the next 6 months, I was tested for every possible illness, only to come up empty-handed. I'd lost my ability to walk almost completely, and my memory and motor skills were rapidly declining. A few months later, I was diagnosed with late-stage Lyme disease. Lyme disease is an infection contracted by being bit by a tick. It has over 200 symptoms and is extremely hard to diagnose. If left untreated, it could cause damage to your heart, brain, nervous system, joints, and so much more. This diagnosis explained everything. The onset of depression, the seizures, the migraines, the pain I'd felt. This was the diagnosis we'd been searching for. I quickly was put on an aggressive treatment plan and begun my recovery process. Even though I was sicker than I'd ever been and didn't seem to be getting better, I was okay. I finally had answers and was reassured I wasn't crazy or making this all up for attention. I really had been sick, and just nobody had figured it out. To this day, I'm still in treatment for Lyme, as well as needing a kidney transplant in the coming months from the lasting effects of it. I was a bit reluctant to share my story today, but sitting here in front of you, I can't help but think back on the countless times I sat and thought to myself, is it really worth it? Will things ever get better? Will this endless cycle of wanting to die ever stop? And I can proudly say the answer is yes. Yes, life is worth it. Yes, things did get better. Yes, the cycle was broken. I think about the fact that I haven't had suicidal thoughts in over 2 years. I sit here and think of how far I've come on my journey and how many people helped me get here. I am the happiest I've ever been. I have great friends, a family who's been nothing but supportive. I'm graduating high school in a few months, and I'm moving on to a new chapter in my life. And I can say that getting help was genuinely the best thing I've ever done.